Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nanawa's channel. This is the full story of my former boss said I was only fit to be an assistant. Now I own a headhunting company that hires executives. Part 1. You're good, but not good enough. 29. I was Julia Bennett, the invisible backbone of Lexon Corp., a bustling Chicago-based trading firm with a sleek loop office and a $500 million portfolio. For 4 years, I'd been the executive, assistant to the CEO, Richard Caldwell, a silver-tongued deal-maker who thrived on power plays. My days started at 6 a.m., juggling his schedule, drafting emails, and prepping reports that landed multi-million-dollar contracts. I wasn't just a scheduler. I suggested strategies, streamlined meetings, even caught errors in financial models that saved Lexon thousands. Colleagues called me the wizard behind the curtain, but Richard took the credit, flashing his perfect smile while I stayed in the shadows. I didn't mind at first. I'd clawed my way into Lexon with a community college degree and a knack for organization, grateful for the $50,000 salary in a city where rent ate half my paycheck. But after 4 years of 60-hour weeks, I wanted more. I saw project managers, less meticulous, less strategic, climbing the ladder while I was stuck fetching coffee and booking flights. I'd pitch ideas in meetings, a new client outreach plan, a cost-cutting logistics tweak. Richard would nod, say, "Interesting," then present them as his own, earning boardroom applause. My name never came up. The breaking point came in a glass-walled conference room on the 30th floor. I'd spent months prepping for a chance to pitch myself for a project manager role. I'd shadowed colleagues, studied Lexon's supply chain, and built a case. I'd led 3 major deals behind, the scenes saving $200,000 in vendor costs. Standing before Richard and 2 VPs, I laid it out. My track record, my vision for managing a new export initiative. My voice was steady, my slides sharp. I finished, heart pounding, expecting questions, maybe praise. Richard leaned back, his smile patronizing. "Julia, you're good," he said, pausing for effect. "Really good. But you're best as a supporting act. You don't have the presence for a leadership role. Stick to what you're great at, being my right hand." The VPs nodded, one stifling a smirk. My face burned, but I held it together. "I've driven results," I said, pointing to my slides. "I'm ready." Richard's smile didn't waver. "You're not there yet. Trust me, you'll thank me for keeping you grounded." The words hit like a slap. Grounded? I'd carried. His ego for years made him look brilliant, and he saw me as a glorified secretary. The VPs moved on, discussing golf, while I gathered my notes, invisible again. Back at my desk, I stared at my inbox. Richard's latest urgent email about his dry cleaning. Colleagues passed, offering pitying glances. I'd given Lexon everything. Late nights, skipped weekends, ideas they'd claimed, and they'd locked me in a box labeled assistant. That night, in my tiny Logan Square apartment, I replayed Richard's voice. "You'll thank me." I wouldn't. I thought of the project managers, their corner offices, their names on deals I'd shaped. I wasn't naive. I knew I lacked their polish, their MBAs, their golf course connections. But I had something they didn't: grit, smarts, and a fire they couldn't douse. Richard thought I was dreaming too big. He was wrong. I opened my laptop, typing a resignation letter. "Effective in 2 weeks," I wrote, my hands steady. I didn't need his permission to grow. The next morning, I handed Richard the letter. He raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his leather chair. "Quitting, Julia? You're making a mistake. You're great at this role. Don't get delusional about your prospects." His tone was almost kind, but it dripped with condescension. I met his gaze, my voice calm. "I'm not delusional. I'm done being your shadow." He chuckled, waving me off. "Good luck out there. You'll be back." I walked out of his office, the Chicago skyline gleaming through the windows. His words stung, but they also clarified everything. Lexon had used me, diminished me, taken my best and given me scraps. I wasn't just leaving a job, I was leaving their limits. In my apartment, I pinned a note to my fridge. Build your own table. Richard thought I'd thank him for holding me back. I'd thank him by proving him wrong, one bold step at a time. Part 2. If they won't choose me, I'll build my own table quitting. Lexon Corp felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. At 29, I'd walked away from a stable $50,000 a year job as Richard Caldwell's executive assistant, his words, "Don't get delusional," ringing in my ears. My Chicago apartment, a cramped Logan Square walk-up, was now a financial tightrope. I had $4,000 saved, enough for 3 months' rent and ramen, but no plan beyond a burning need to prove I was more than a supporting act. Richard thought, I'd crawl back. I'd rather starve than give him the satisfaction. I threw myself into reinvention. For 6 months, I became a student again, enrolling in online courses through platforms like Coursera and LinkedIn Learning. I studied strategic HR, executive recruitment, and organizational psychology, devouring lessons on talent acquisition and leadership profiling. Nights were spent in my kitchen, laptop glowing, scribbling notes on how to match C-level execs with company culture. I'd spent years watching Richard and Lexon's VPs, their strengths, flaws, egos. I knew what made leaders tick, and I'd turned that instinct into a career. To pay the bills, I took a temp job at a small headhunting firm, Talent Scout, for $20 an hour. It was grunt work, scheduling interviews, vetting resumes, but it was a masterclass. I shadowed senior recruiters, learning to spot red flags in CEOs' LinkedIn profiles, negotiate 6-figure salaries, and pitch candidates to skeptical boards. I saw gaps in the industry. Too many headhunters chased flashy resumes, ignoring cultural fit or long-term vision. I started sketching a business plan on my breaks, fueled by coffee and defiance. If Lexon wouldn't promote me, I'd build a firm that redefined leadership hiring. The idea for Next Tier was born in a dive bar, over wings with my friend Lena, a former Lexon analyst who'd also jumped ship. "You get people, Julia," she said, wiping hot sauce from her chin. "You could pick better execs than Richard in your sleep." I laughed, but her words stuck. We pooled $5,000, my savings, her freelance earnings, and launched Next Tier in a 100-square-foot office in Pilsen, a desk wedged between a noisy radiator and a window overlooking a taqueria. Our first client, a local tech startup, needed a CFO. I spent weeks scouring profiles, interviewing candidates, and pitching a mid-career finance whiz who'd turned around 2 firms. They hired her, paying us $10,000. It was a tiny win, but it felt like a revolution. No, one took us seriously at first. An assistant starting a headhunting firm? A competitor scoffed at a networking event. Stick to coffee runs. I smiled, but inside I burned, hearing Richard's, "You're not there yet." Lena and I worked 16-hour days, cold calling startups, crafting pitches, building a database of 500 execs. We were broke, sharing a 30-week grocery budget, but every placement, $5,000 here, $8,000 there, was a brick in our foundation. I taught myself to read boardroom dynamics, spotting what made a leader thrive or crash. My years at Lexon, invisible but observant, were my edge. By month 6, Next Tier had 3 clients and $25,000 in revenue. We hired a part-time intern, a DePaul student who managed our emails. I was no longer fetching coffee. I was choosing who'd sit at the C-suite table. Still, doubt crept in. What if Richard was right? What if I was delusional, a nobody playing? At CEO? Then a client, the startup's founder, called. "Your CFO's killing it," he said. "She's why we're profitable. How'd you find her?" I smiled. "I just know who fits." He referred us to 2 more firms, and our phones started ringing. In my apartment, I pinned a new note to my fridge next to "Build your own table." Prove it. Richard's dismissal, Lexon's glass ceiling, the industry's sneers, they were fuel. I wasn't just building a company. I was building a stage where I called the shots. As I prepped for our next pitch, a $20,000 deal for a biotech COO, I looked at my old Lexon badge, tucked in a drawer. Executive assistant. That girl was gone. I was Julia Bennett, founder, and I was just getting started. They'd kept me in the wings. Now I was rewriting the play. Part 3. I used to fetch coffee for bosses. Now I pick boardroom leaders. 2 years after quitting Lexon Corp, I was no longer Julia Bennett, the invisible assistant tethered to Richard Caldwell's ego. At 31, I was the founder of Next Tier, a Chicago headhunting firm that was rewriting how companies hired their leaders. From a shoebox office in Pilsen, my partner Lena and I had built a reputation for finding C-suite executives who didn't just look good on paper but fit a company's soul. We'd grown from one client to 25, placing CEOs, COOs, and regional directors for startups and mid-sized firms, pulling in $250,000 in revenue. The industry, which once scoffed at a glorified secretary, now called me a rising star. But I kept my Lexon past locked away, letting my work speak louder than my scars. Next Tier's edge was precision. I'd spent years at Lexon observing power plays, Richard's charm masking his insecurity, VP's egos derailing deals. That insight, honed through online courses in HR and psychology, let me read candidates like open books. For a Denver tech startup, I placed a CFO who'd been overlooked for her quiet demeanor, but tripled their profits in a year. For a Milwaukee retailer, I found a CEO whose values aligned with their family-run ethos, boosting morale and sales. Clients raved, "Julia gets it." Our fees climbed, $20,000 per placement, then $50,000 for C-level roles. Lena handled contracts. I led the hunts, interviewing candidates late into the night, my Pilsen loft glowing with ambition. Our big break came with a $100,000 contract from a Boston biotech firm needing a global VP. They'd fired their last hire, a flashy Ivy Leaguer who clashed with their culture. I spent weeks profiling 30 candidates, flying to Boston to meet their board, and handpicked a scientist-turned-exec who'd led turnarounds in Europe. 6 months later, their stock rose 15%. The CEO called, "Julia, how do you do it? You're like a mind reader." I laughed, leaning back in our now upgraded office, a 500-square-foot space with actual windows. "I've sat next to leaders for years," I said. "I know what makes them tick." I didn't mention Lexon, the coffee runs, the stolen ideas. That was my fuel, not their story. The industry took notice. Crane's Chicago business named Next Tier a top 10 HR disruptor, praising our human-first approach. I spoke at a Midwest tech conference, sharing how to spot leadership potential beyond resumes. A startup founder in the audience asked, "Where'd you learn to read execs like that?" I smiled, dodging, "Long hours and good coffee." The crowd laughed, but Lena in the back shot me a knowing look. She knew the truth. Every placement was a middle finger to Richard's "you're not there yet." We hired 5 more staff, including a data analyst to streamline our candidate searches, and moved to a River North office, its skyline view a far cry from my old cubicle. My silence about Lexon wasn't shame, it was strategy. I didn't need pity or a redemption arc. Every contract, every happy client buried Richard's dismissal deeper. Next Tier's portfolio grew, 40 placements, $1 million in revenue, clients from Seattle to Miami. We specialized in startups and mid-caps, firms Lexon often ignored, matching them with leaders who shared their hunger. A Detroit auto suppliers COO placed by us texted, "You saved our company?" I framed that message, hanging it beside my desk next to a note. "Prove it." Doubt still crept in. Late nights, I'd stare at my old Lexon badge, executive assistant, wondering if I was still that girl, playing at CEO. Then a client's board would call, thanking me for their perfect hire, and the doubt vanished. I wasn't just picking execs. I was building futures for clients, for my team, for the assistant who'd been told she'd never lead. As I prepped for a new $75,000 placement, a Silicon Valley CTO, I got an X notification. "Julia Bennett of Next Tier is the headhunter to watch." I smiled, saving it to my portfolio. Richard thought I'd thank him for holding me back. I was thanking him by outgrowing his world, one perfect hire at a time. Part 4. I got their email, and nearly dropped my phone. 3 years after walking away from Lexon Corp, I was no longer the invisible assistant fetching coffee for Richard. Caldwell. At 32, I was Julia Bennett, CEO of Nextier, a Chicago headhunting firm with a River North office, 15 employees, and a reputation for placing game-changing executives. We'd secured 50 high-profile hires, CEOs, COOs, VPs, for startups and Fortune 500s, generating $2 million in revenue. Crane's Chicago business called us the gold standard in talent acquisition, and I'd spoken at conferences from Dallas to Dubai. My past at Lexon, where I'd been dismissed as a supporting act, was buried deep, a silent fuel for every deal I closed. Until an email changed everything. It was a crisp fall morning when my assistant Tara poked her head into my office. "Julia, you've got a call from Lexon Corp," she said, her eyes wide. "They want to meet about recruiting a new CEO." My phone slipped from my hand, clattering on the desk. Lexon, my old employer, the place that had locked me in an assistant's cage where Richard had smirked. "You'll thank me for keeping you grounded." I stared at Tara, my pulse racing. "Lexon," I repeated, half expecting a prank. She nodded, handing me a printed email from their HR director. "Ms. Bennett, Nextier's reputation is unmatched. We urgently need a new CEO and believe you're the ideal partner to find them." I read it twice, my mind reeling. Lena, my co-founder, burst in, catching my expression. "What's wrong?" I handed her the email. She scanned it, then grinned. "They're hiring you to replace Richard? Oh, this is poetic." I didn't laugh. The email didn't mention Richard, but industry whispers on X confirmed Lexon's board had pushed him out. Stock down 20%, 2 botched deals, clients fleeing. They needed a savior, and they'd turned to me, the assistant they'd once deemed unfit to lead. They didn't know Nextier's Julia Bennett was their old coffee runner. The irony was almost too rich. I spent the night pacing my apartment, Lexon's glass-walled boardroom flashing in my mind, Richard's patronizing smile, the VP's smirks, my crushed pitch for a promotion. Part of me wanted to delete the email, let them flounder. But another part, the one that had built Nextier from a $5,000 gamble, saw opportunity. Not to help Lexon, but to face them, to stand where they'd diminished me and show what I'd become. I called Lena at midnight. "I'm taking the meeting," I said. "Not for them, for me." She whooped. "Give 'em hell, Julia." We prepped like it was war. I crafted a 20-page proposal detailing Nextier's process, psychometric assessments, cultural alignment, a 95% retention rate for our placements. Lena dug up Lexon's financials, $50 million in losses, a board desperate for stability. Tara mocked up a sleek pitch deck, showcasing our wins, a Seattle startup's CEO doubling revenue, a Miami retailer's COO saving $10 million. I practiced my delivery, channeling every late-night study session, every client I'd won over skeptics. This wasn't just a job. It was a reckoning. The meeting was set for Lexon's Loop headquarters, the same building where I'd spent 4 years as a shadow. I chose a tailored navy suit, my hair pulled back, my old Lexon badge tucked in my purse like a talisman. Lena hugged me at the office door. "You're not their assistant anymore," she said. "You're their equal. Hell, you're their better." I nodded, but my stomach churned. Would Richard be there? Would they recognize me? Did it matter? I'd built Nextier without their approval, placed leaders who reshaped industries. Lexon wasn't my redemption. It was my stage. As I rode the soft L to the Loop, Chicago's skyline gleamed, a city that had tested and forged me. I thought of my fridge note, "Build your own table," and the years of stolen credit, of "You're not there yet." Richard had bet I'd fail, that I'd return, humbled. Now his company was begging for my help, unaware I was the assistant they'd overlooked. I clutched my pitch deck, my knuckles white. This wasn't about saving Lexon. It was about showing the girl who'd left in silence that she'd built an empire. The train slowed and I stepped off, ready to face the past and rewrite it. Part 5. When I walked in, no one dared look me in the eye. The glass doors of Lexon Corp's Chicago headquarters loomed like a portal to my past. At 32, I stepped into the 30th floor boardroom, no longer Julia Bennett, the assistant who'd fetched coffee and swallowed insults. I was the CEO of Next Tier, a headhunting firm with $2 million in revenue and a reputation for placing transformative executives. My tailored navy suit and sleek pitch deck replaced the notepad and deference of 3 years ago. The email from Lexon, begging Next Tier to recruit their new CEO, had brought me here, to the room where Richard Caldwell had smirked, "You're best as a supporting act." Now they needed me to save them, unaware I was the delusional assistant they'd dismissed. The boardroom was unchanged, mahogany table, city skyline gleaming through windows, the air thick with corporate ego. Richard sat at the head, his hair grayer, his confidence dimmed by Lexon's $50 million losses. Around him were familiar faces. 2 VPs who'd nodded at my demotion, a new HR director, and a board member I'd once booked flights for. Their eyes flicked to me as I entered, a mix of curiosity and unease. Richard stood, extending a hand, his smile practiced. "Ms. Bennett, pleasure to meet you," he said. "You look familiar." A VP coughed, recognition dawning in his widened eyes. I shook his hand, my voice cool. "I used to work here, Richard. You might not recall. I was the one making your coffee." The room froze, a collective intake of breath. Richard's smile faltered, his hand lingering in mine before dropping. The VPs shifted, one staring at the table, another pretending to check his phone. The HR director blinked, piecing it together. I didn't flinch, setting my pitch deck on the table, the Next Tier logo bold on the cover. "But I'm here as CEO of Next Tier," I continued, "to discuss your CEO search. Shall we begin?" The silence was deafening, their discomfort a trophy I didn't need to acknowledge. I launched into my presentation, my voice steady, commanding. Lexon's challenges, declining, stock, client attrition, require a leader with vision and cultural alignment, I said, clicking through slides. I detailed Next Tier's process. Psychometric profiling, 95% retention rate, 50 placements saving clients $100 million collectively. I cited our Seattle startup CEO, who'd doubled revenue, our Miami COO, who'd cut costs by 20%. The board leaned in, scribbling notes, hanging on my words. Richard's jaw tightened, his pen still. AVP, the one who'd smirked years ago, dared a question. "How do you ensure cultural fit?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "By understanding people, not just resumes. I've spent years studying leaders, watching what makes them succeed or fail." I paused, letting the weight settle. "Some might say I learned that making coffee." The room stifled laughs, Richard's face reddening. I moved on, outlining 3 candidate archetypes for Lexon's needs: a turnaround specialist, a growth innovator, a culture builder. "We'll deliver a shortlist in 60 days, I concluded, "with a hire guaranteed to stabilize your board." As I packed up, Richard cleared his throat, his voice strained. "Julia, we didn't realize you'd come so far." Impressive. It wasn't an apology, just a hedge against his own embarrassment. I smiled, polite but sharp. "Thank you. I've had time to grow, outside Lexon's shadow." The board member nodded, almost reverent. "We're lucky to have you." I didn't correct him. They weren't lucky. They were desperate, and I was here on my terms. Outside, the Chicago wind hit me, but I felt weightless. I'd walked into the room that had crushed me, faced Richard's smugness, and owned it. No one had dared meet my eyes for long, not out of disrespect, but awe. I'd presented not just a plan, but proof. The assistant they'd dismissed had built an empire. Lena texted, "How'd it go?" I replied, "They listened." Back at Next Tier's office, I taped Lexon's email to our whiteboard, a relic of victory. Richard thought I'd thank him for holding me back. I'd thanked him by surpassing him, and the real work, finding Lexon's next leader, was just beginning. Part 6. I didn't change to be seen. I changed to need no one. Boardroom showdown at Lexon Corp was a turning point, but for me, Julia Bennett, it wasn't the end game. At 32, I'd returned to the Chicago firm that had confined me to an assistant's role, facing Richard Caldwell, the CEO who'd dismissed me as a supporting act and delivered a pitch that left them speechless. As CEO of Next Tier, my headhunting firm with $2 million in revenue and 50 high-profile placements, I'd proven my worth not just to Lexon, but to the girl who'd walked out 3 years ago, stung by "you'll thank me for keeping you grounded." Now, the real victory lay in finishing what I'd started, delivering Lexon's new CEO and closing the chapter on my past. The contract was grueling. Over 60 days, Next Tier screened 200 candidates, conducted 40 interviews, and used psychometric tools to profile Lexon's needs. Lena, my co-founder, led data analysis, while I met Lexon's board weekly, navigating their egos and $50 million loss. We shortlisted 3 candidates, a turnaround expert from Boston, a growth strategist from Austin, and a culture-focused exec from Seattle. I presented them in Lexon's boardroom, Richard absent. Rumors said he'd taken a sabbatical. The board chose the Seattle exec, a woman whose inclusive leadership mirrored Next Tier's ethos. She signed within a week, stabilizing Lexon's stock by 10%. Their HR director emailed, "You've saved us, Julia." I didn't reply. I hadn't saved Lexon. I'd done my job. The aftermath was electric. Crane's Chicago business ran a feature, Next Tier's Julia Bennett rescues Lexon with perfect CEO pick. X buzzed with posts, from assistant to headhunter queen. Forbes invited me to a Women in Business panel where I shared Next Tier's rise without mentioning Lexon. My silence wasn't bitterness. It was power. I didn't need their validation. Every placement, every client, buried Richard's delusional deeper. Next Tier grew to 20 employees, $5 million in revenue, and 75 placements, including a Silicon Valley CTO who saved her firm $20 million. We moved to a sleek loop office, steps from Lexon's tower, a quiet irony. A week after the Lexon deal, I got an email from Sarah, Richard's former assistant, who'd watched my demotion in silence. "I thought you'd fail," she wrote. "I was wrong. You're incredible." I stared at the words, feeling neither anger nor pride, just closure. Sarah, like Richard, was a footnote. My focus was bigger. Mentoring new hires, speaking at HR summits, launching a Next Tier scholarship for first-gen college students. A Detroit startup CEO, one of our placements, called, "You didn't just find me, you changed how I lead." That was my legacy, not Lexon's applause. I visited Lexon one last time, delivering the final contract report. The boardroom felt smaller, its mahogany table less imposing. The new CEO, already reshaping Lexon's culture, shook my hand. "You're a genius, Julia," she said. I smiled, thinking of the coffee runs, the stolen ideas, the "you're not there yet." I didn't need their genius label. I'd built my own. As I left, I passed my old cubicle, now someone else's. The skyline gleamed through the window. Chicago's, pulse matching mine. I didn't look back. That night, I stood in Next Tier's office signing a $500,000 contract with a global retailer for their C-suite overhaul. My team, Lena, Tara, our new analysts, cheered, toasting with sparkling water. I pinned the contract to our whiteboard, next to Lexon's email, my old badge tucked away. Richard's voice faded, powerless. I'd changed not to be seen by him, but to need no one's approval. My fridge note, "Build your own table," was my North Star, guiding every hire, every deal. At a conference weeks later, I spoke to 1,000 HR pros, holding up a blank assistant's badge. "You don't need a title to lead," I said. "If they won't choose you, build your own stage." The crowd stood, clapping, and a young assistant in the front row nodded, eyes fierce. I gave her my card, knowing she'd rise. As I left, Chicago's lights stretched below, each a testament to the girl who'd refused to stay small. "You did this, Julia," I whispered. Next here was my empire, but my real triumph was freedom, to create, to lead, to never need their table again. Thank you for listening. Please give a like and subscribe to the channel so I have more motivation to create even more great stories.